Okay, first of all, we would like to thank you for accepting this offer to make an interview or conversation with us and for the recording. And first of all, we like to introduce you to our Turkish audience. Maybe you can introduce yourself a bit about your academic background and your interests, hobbies, or everything maybe.
Right. Well, my name is Mark Nieuwenstein. I'm an assistant professor here at the University of Groningen. And I guess, I started studying psychology, my field of science, in 1994 already, so it's a long time ago. And I studied psychology at Utrecht University in the Netherlands as well. And following my studies, I did a PhD project there. And basically then started my career in academics and have been in academics ever since. And I'm now assistant professor here in Groningen. So,
In between Utrecht and coming to here, I saw in your CV you've been to postdoctoral working in MIT also. That's a very prestigious school.
I know, yeah, it's a great place to be. I guess at this point it's actually the #1 university of the world, and it was really a humbling experience to be able to work there for 2 years. I guess in getting there, I was a bit lucky. I must confess, I'm not that smart, perhaps. But I basically, during my PhD studies, I had the opportunity to do an internship for 2 months at Yale University. And the professor I worked with over there was a former graduate student of a professor at MIT. And I guess during those 2 months of internship, I made a good impression on this professor. And then when there was a job advertisement from this other professor at MIT, I had a very good reference from the former grad student of that professor. So I guess that really helped in getting me into MIT. And having been there for 2 years, it is really an amazing place to be. It's really the world level, top level science. I mean, it's a great place. So many famous people, so many famous researchers.
Was it like really extreme hard to difficult to get on with, or like a normal doing? Like, I mean, it's more advanced than the stuff. But is it more problem to you, like not working or can't working? But of course.
Well, it's a great place to be. I mean, the level of the people who work there is really, really high. I was there as a postdoctoral student, so having finished my PhD studies. And I basically, had the opportunity also to take some courses that were offered there, also to master students, but also PhD students. And really the level is extreme. These are really definitely the smartest people on earth, you might almost say. So again, it was a humbling experience, and then having read myself books and research articles, you often encounter names of those are your famous researchers, your idols basically, and then I guess you run into them at MIT, and they are there working next door, or they come by to give a talk. So there's a great opportunity to be amongst such greatly intelligent people and really seeing all the great work they do. So it was a really nice experience, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, after Utrecht, you did your masters in Amsterdam, University of Amsterdam?
Oh no, I actually did my bachelor and masters. At that time there was no distinction between the two, so there was just one 4-year program of psychology studies. Which basically included both bachelor courses and a master phase.
And in the master, it's experimental psychology.
I basically was, I specialized in cognitive and clinical neuropsychology as a student. And I subsequently actually spent half a year working in a psychiatric hospital, working with patients and doing all kinds of psychological tests with the patients. And I guess from doing those tests, I actually got more and more interested in what those tests are actually measuring. And of course, it's interesting and nice to be able to interact with the patients and to see how they develop. But at the same time, I was more curious about what was actually wrong with the patients in terms of information processing, what was happening in their minds. And I guess from there, I sort of developed an ambition to learn more about psychology, actually, moving beyond my master's. And that would involve doing a PhD. So I guess at some point there was a job opening at Utrecht University for a PhD position, and it dealt with a topic on visual perception, attention, and consciousness, which I found very interesting. So I applied for the job and got the position, and from there continued my studies and sort of became specialized in studying visual perception, attention, and memory.
Okay. Okay. Which courses do you give in University of Groningen?
Currently, well, I teach biopsychology.
I'm a student of yours.
That is what brought you here. That's a first-year course. I teach in the English Language Psychology Bachelor. Then I also teach a course on decision-making, which of course in the third year of the bachelor program. I this year also taught a course on cognition and attention, which is most close to my own research, I would say. And lastly, I teach a course in the research master program we have in behavioral and cognitive neurosciences. And that is a course called Models of Cognition, and it basically goes into more theories of how the mind works and how the brain works in closer detail. So it's really an advanced level course for research master students. So in total I teach 4 courses. But what I also do is I supervise students who do a literature study. I use for that the book Quest for Consciousness. Okay, so yeah, I teach, or at least I supervise students for a literature study. It's an individual course in the third year, and I actually organize some meetings where me and the students get together who are reading the book simply to discuss the book and see what comes up. So it's not lectures, but it's really more informal.
Literature research about on this book.
Right, only. It's basically students read the book and we discuss it in these meetings, and then well, the course is ended with an essay that the students write about a topic from the book, or they can write an exam about it. That's up to them.
And I think for your academic background also, but also maybe they want to know what you're interested in aside of your academic things, like your hobbies or maybe yourself.
Yes. Well, actually, I must say there's little time for hobbies when you have a career in academics. I guess well, we typically spend maybe 50 to 60 hours working each week, leaving little time for things outside of family. I have a family. I have 3 kids, so I like to spend some time with them as well. And then combined with the time for work, that leaves very little time for personal hobbies. Although I do have some. I really love soccer. I love watching soccer games on television, love playing soccer myself. Not in a team or anything, but just for fun of it.
Like most of Dutch people.
Most Dutch people like soccer, and me too. So other than
and
soccer,
your team, I presume FC Groningen, or?
Well, yeah, now that I live here, definitely FC Groningen is one of my favorites. My actual favorite is Feyenoord, which is a club from Rotterdam. But in any case, so soccer I really enjoy, watching games, but also playing myself. And lastly, what I've always done is play guitar. So I like making music.
Like acoustic or electronic?
Acoustic guitar. I used to play in a band, but again, well, that was before moving to Groningen.
Lots of teachers here, I think, they really musicians also.
Have some musical skills. Yeah, I guess it comes with the... I guess being in academics, I mean, you have to be a bit creative, I think, right? And I think that often goes hand in hand with other creative hobbies, I guess. So music or painting or other
lots of science and analytical stuff, and then
right, yeah.
Can you introduce your department maybe a bit to our Turkish audience if they come here, want to come here, study, or apply for masters or PhD?
Definitely. Yeah, so I work in the Department of Experimental Psychology. It's one of many departments within the Faculty of Social Sciences, and I guess we have different domains or aspects of psychology in different groups. So we have work and organizational psychology, clinical psychology, and I'm in the group of experimental psychology. And I guess, well, as experimental psychologists, we're interested in studying how the mind works, but also in how the brain works. And in studying that, we often collaborate also with people, neuroscientists, but also biologists. And I guess one nice thing of studying here in Groningen is we have a very nice research master program in behavioral and cognitive neurosciences, which basically is a 2-year training program for students who are interested in becoming researchers themselves and studying, again, how the brain and mind work. And it's a very nice program where we actually collaborate with different faculties. So it's not just psychology that contributes to the program, but it's also biology and medical sciences.
Neurosciences.
All of those different domains of science or fields come together in organizing this program.
So here, one question. Here, the psychology counts as like from medical profession, or because I saw medical center Groningen, so...
Right, no. No, that's more the neuroscientists. They're part of the medical center, and I guess the psychologists are part of the social sciences faculty. And well, there's more and more overlap since psychologists are becoming more interested in what happens in the brain, and
Biological
neuroscientists are becoming more and more interested in psychology, and likewise biology is sort of at the interface of those two as well.
So your department was cognitive and clinical, no?
Oh no, no,
What was
experimental psychology.
Experimental psychology,
And
okay.
that's a very general.
So
term.
this name for the whole school's name, like research school, okay.
Right.
Then let's come to the main point. So I'll ask you a question, maybe a challenging for us as a scientist. You worked lots of years about psychology, cognitive psychology, experimental, and biopsychology. You give the course of biopsychology. So here's the question, and we'll expect an answer as parsimonious as possible, of course. So what is biopsychology?
So what is biopsychology? Well, I guess we sort of talked about it before. It sort of gets at the fact that if we want to understand how the mind works nowadays, we should also understand how the brain works. And I guess biopsychology is the course that brings the two together. So we have to do with things that we know from psychology, like ideas about how we feel and how our personalities evolve, but also how our mind works in perceiving information, but also remembering information. Those are all things that have been traditionally studied in psychological research for many decades. And since about 20 years or so, really new techniques like fMRI have also allowed us to look into the brains of people while they are experiencing certain things or doing certain kinds of tasks. So that really brings together what we know about psychology, psychological mechanisms, together with, well, now insights about what is happening in the brains of people while these things are happening. And that really creates an interface between, well, understanding the brain, but also understanding the mind. And I guess biopsychology is really a course where those two things come together, where we look at, well, all kinds of aspects of human behavior, from very basic things like controlling our hunger, but also falling asleep and waking up again, very basic behaviors, all the way up to the levels of consciousness, language, memory, and attention. And we try to look at all those topics, both in terms of psychological mechanisms, but also, and particularly, how these mechanisms are working in the brain. So what brain processes underlie these different aspects of cognition.
Could we say that biopsychology is trying to handle or solve the brain-mind problem, or brain-mind dualism, because they want to bring together how action potentials happening in brain biologically affects the abstract mind or consciousness. We can, maybe I can give the example if it's right.
True. No, it's definitely one of the most difficult problems there is in science, and I think people, grand Nobel Prize winners, have said, well, the last big remaining problem for science to solve is really the problem of the mind-body problem.
Yeah.
So how do we go from the physical substrates of the mind or the brain to the subjective experiences that we have, and how can we go, well, from physical to mental? And I guess, yeah, definitely biopsychology is the course at the interface of those two topics, because it's again including the study of the brain, but also the mind. And it's definitely, when we talk about consciousness, that's when we really hit this hard problem of, well, how can we ever explain the fact that we feel, that we experience what we see, associate that with feelings, which are all subjective qualities. They're very personal, individual. And how can we ever explain that in terms of, well, what happens in the brain? Which is a big problem, but again, it's a fascinating problem to think about, and to be to be part of the researchers who are working on this kind of problem. It's a great great experience.
Okay, then away from the hard questions, maybe we can say how to become a biopsychologist, because I want to, for example, I want to study about circadian rhythms. I'm really fascinated about sleep and how our consciousness becomes offline, so to say, in sleeping, and then we woke up and we don't perceive time. So time perception is an interesting issue on top of it. So, for example, let's just say I want to become a biopsychologist to maybe research this.
Right.
How to become?
Well, I think you took the first step already by coming to Groningen and studying psychology here. And I guess so psychology as a bachelor program is really a stepping stone towards master programs, research master programs, where you can learn the skills and knowledge that
And
you
foundation
need,
of the like
right, and become a researcher yourself, and be able to study all these fascinating, interesting topics yourself. So that would be one pathway, but again, nowadays, because it's such an interdisciplinary field, we're again pointing out that we have neuroscientists, biologists, and psychologists, and they're all working together to try to solve these interesting problems. So you can also enter this research career or research on brain, mind, body problems, brain and mind problems. You can also, well, get into that kind of research from a biology program or from a neuroscience program, or nowadays from artificial intelligence programs, which study computer intelligence, right? So they are also dealing with similar kinds of problems as well, we all find interesting. So I would say there's different ways of getting into a research career, but probably the most straightforward path is from studying psychology, because that's where you really get the foundational knowledge about all that we know about psychology, and then you can move forward and look into the biological aspects of that.
it can change from university to university or from country to country, but we can say general route is bachelor's in psychology and then master's, and if you go into deep, like PhD, and while doing this, of course, researching and
Exactly.
side.
Yep. So that would be my advice to you is to keep doing well in the psychology bachelor, and well, join the BCM research master program afterwards.
Here's advertisement.
More advertisements.
Do you have any interesting examples about what does biopsychologists do, or what is biopsychology interested in, to be make it more concrete in the minds of our audience?
Yeah, well, I guess biopsychologists and trying to understand once again the mind and the brain and how they are connected. The researchers, the discoveries they make will be well, possibly lead to new treatments for people with all kinds of psychiatric conditions like depression, schizophrenia. Those are illnesses that are based on neural dysfunctioning, and they result in symptoms that we can observe and can measure using our psychological methods. And I guess by studying biopsychology, we get at the neural mechanisms that underlie these diseases, and thereby also gain knowledge that might lead to new treatments, medications, for instance. I mean, obviously, Alzheimer, dementias are a very big problem in society nowadays. As people grow older and older, the risk of getting dementia becomes increasingly large, and many more people will suffer from these kinds of diseases in the future. So these are big problems that need to be tackled, and there's really no proper treatment at this stage yet for such kinds of illnesses. And I think neurologists, neuroscientists, but also psychologists are really working together to be able to diagnose these kinds of conditions, but also to understand what happens in the brains of these patients, so that we can actually devise interventions and treatments for these patients.
So these were good. These were good examples, of course. Can you have you any other examples or interesting facts on your mind?
Well,
while we are closing,
I guess, yeah. Well, looking towards the future, I think so. Advancing biopsychology, getting more knowledge. So psychologists are starting to understand the functioning, so what functions different parts of the brain fulfill. And at the same time, neuroscientists are studying everything about how those brains actually function themselves in a biological sense. And I guess, well, things are getting, well, I mean, I can imagine things in the future. I mean, to what extent will we know how the brain works and how it controls the mind? And what can we actually do with this knowledge? And I think one of the most exciting developments, also in view of treating all kinds of diseases, is the development of optogenetics, which is a really cool tool, has been around for about 10 years or so, and it's really in its infancy still, so researchers are working really hard to develop the techniques further. But it's a technique whereby you can actually influence the workings of a brain in a very specific manner. You can actually turn neurons in the brain, cells in the brain. You can turn them on or off, and from the knowledge that we have about, well, what these neurons do in terms of information processing, well, if we can then selectively influence the functioning of certain neurons, well, you can imagine, well, all kinds of things that we might be able to do in the future, including treating patients.
So could we simply say optogenetic because they'll ask the question, what is optogenetics? So can we say that changing some neurons' genetics to make them responsive to the light, like some photobacteria, and if they become responsive to light, we can send light beams in order to control them, basically.
Right, and at present it's through actual light beams that need to be sent into the brain through optic fibers. But obviously there might be other solutions to that, whereby we can actually not need the fibers going into the brain, but actually use external stimulation, certain wavelengths that might pass through the brain that might actually also activate and deactivate these cells, and thereby make it less invasive and more applicable. Yeah. And obviously these are the things that people working in the more technological fields, physics, radiologists, they are all working on answering the questions that we need to answer in order to improve on these methods. But considering how quickly these developments go, it's a really intriguing question to think about, well, where would we be in 100 years from now? Yeah. We discovered the discovery of a neuron was made 100 years ago, in 1906 at least, approximately around that time. And now we're 100 years from that, and we already know how many neurons make complex networks and underlie many complex things of behavior and cognition. And now we're actually moving towards being able to influence the workings of individual neurons. And then if that has only taken 100 years, well, imagine where we would be in 100 years from now, given the rate of development.
Thanks for accepting us and hold the interview. So you gained the gratitude of all Turkish audience who wants to know about biopsychology.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hoşça kalın.
Bye bye.